Guru, do you remember what your second question was? Because I lost it in answering the first one.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I think the second question was basically when he said, when you're aware of what is going on in everyday activity, basically that itself is a part of the transformation. My question is, I think, at least according to him, we need to test that hypothesis on our own and see if it actually happens in our life rather than agreeing with him or disagreeing with him.
Quite right. Now, what I think about it is that when he is talking about seeing or perception, it's a total thing. That is, you see the whole field, everything that is involved in it. It is not just one fragment of the field, which is what the intellect breaks it up into fragments and concentrates on a particular question or a particular fragment.
I don't know if anybody can hear me. If anybody can hear me, wave. Okay, well, that part works, but I don't hear any sound at all.
So you are muted.
Peter, as I mentioned on the
My sound is up to maximum.
he cannot hear us, so there's no point talking to him.
Well, maybe it's
I
me.
am communicating with Peter on private chat.
Yeah. So I can go ahead?
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting.
Now, the seeing can be very superficial or it can go to great depths. And as his whole passage on transformation itself pointed out, the inquiry goes all the way from a superficial, just order in the room, to thought denies love and all the way like that. So it's at a very deep level of consciousness that those things are there. And unless one has the right question, your attention doesn't focus on that part or that region. So that's why one has to stay with the question and also pay attention without concentrating on a fragment, so choiceless awareness, and perceive as deeply as you can. You can't go beyond that. So you perceive as deeply as you can. That's what I think is implied. And there is a statement of it which is related to this. He says, perception is action. We think that action involves some act of will, something I do to change the situation and so on. And he's saying, no, perception is action. If you perceive the falseness, the false ends. And thereby there is a real change. What the will accomplishes is to relieve the pain or to help you escape from the situation or suppress the happening which you are watching. Those are things which will is able to do, but that does not change the underlying causation, and therefore it will recur again. So this transformation requires the causation to be broken, and that's only possible when the false ends. And the false ends when you have perceived the falseness of it. Now the falseness lies at various levels of the consciousness. At the deepest level, as I said, the feeling the sages have said that the feeling of being a separate individual is itself simply a put together of thought and not have a reality in nature. That we are all interconnected and it's one whole consciousness filtered through our brain, which is conditioned, and it's the conditioning which alters the perception. And so if you are free from that conditioning, then what you see is the truth. And when you see the truth, the false ends. So that brings about a real change, which is why perception is the true action. What we call action is not really action because it's only at the level of symptoms, not at the level of the causation or the disease underlying it. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, I think you already, even in the first statement, you said basically this is a hypothesis that we need to test ourselves. I think you agreed with that. So basically, that's answered part of the question, and you went a little more deeper onto what it is. So, yes.
Yeah, no, that applies to everything, not only to this question, but to all questions, not to simply accept Krishnaji's answer because he was a wise man. And that's a very important part of how to approach Krishnamurti's teaching, that you cannot really follow a wise man because your decision to follow doesn't work at the level of consciousness. It works at the superficial level of how to dress, what exercises to do, and practicing some techniques and so on. But it doesn't, you cannot order perception. So his teaching is that we have to pursue the truth that is being pointed at. And that truth is not really precisely describable. So one shouldn't just go by his description, but find out for ourselves, discover for ourselves. I have read a dialogue in which he is told that you use different words and you say things not very precisely. And he said, I will deliberately change the words because the word is not the thing anyway. So even if I gave a very precise explanation or precise definition, you would still not have the truth. And you would still have to investigate in order to come upon truth at the level of perception. And that's why perception is the real action. So the intellect creates the question, but it cannot give you perception. It's only one fragment of the whole. There is also the emotion, the body, the whole of you, the senses. So it requires a total attention, which is choiceless. Choiceless awareness, that's how I understand what he is saying. So the limitation is within us, because as I pointed out yesterday, the intellectuals, we are very much fragmented because we have specialized and we dwell on certain questions and ignore other questions as unimportant and so on. So all that selection process and the specialization blocks holistic perception. One has to be also aware of that in oneself. That's what then at least you know that you don't know or you don't have it. So shall we go on for today now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So today we will deal with chapters 4 and 5. In chapter 4, which is the first session now, which we will do for about 1 hour, 15 minutes, and then break for half an hour. Then take up chapter 5. And next week, we will do 3 chapters, which would be 6, 7, and 8. In chapter 4, he begins with distinguishing between joy and pleasure. He says that it often appears to us as if they are same, but joy is always only in the present, and pleasure is created by thought, which is thinking in terms of either the past or the future, and is measuring achievement, success, and satisfaction. So when you are seeking satisfaction, it is a pleasure. When you are seeking maximization of the pleasure or possession of the pleasure, that becomes a desire process. And the fulfillment of that desire is the pleasure you are seeking. But joy is an innate part of life. It is the beauty that is innately there in every aspect of our life. There is great beauty in nature. Of course, you need sensitivity to perceive that joy and perceive that beauty. And we'll come to that, what blocks sensitivity, what makes us insensitive. But if you are sensitive, you perceive the beauty in that activity. There is great beauty in nature, and if you are sensitive to that, you perceive that beauty when you are in contact with nature. And there is great beauty in art and music, literature. There is great beauty in friendship, in games and sports. Also, there is great beauty in academics, in science, mathematics. When you dwell on it, the beauty may not reveal itself immediately, but when you dwell on it, pay attention to it, you will see the beauty in it, which gives you joy. The joy that is innate to that activity, not as distinct from the reward or the pleasure that you derive in achievement and so on, as distinct from that. So he is pointing out that because we are chasing pleasure, seeking more and more pleasure, wanting more and more excitement, or wanting to hold on to a pleasure, repeat it, possess it so that you can have it every day, all that becomes a desire process. And the achievement is the seeking of that pleasure, repetition. And that blocks the joy, because then you are not staying with it in the present. You are wanting to hold on to it. You are wanting to do something about it and so on. And therefore not just playing, it's not playing the game for the love of it, but for the victory, for the achievement. So that's the difference between at least psychological pleasure and joy. There is, of course, physical pleasure also. Simply feeling the breeze on your skin, eating some food, and you get pleasure. You go for a walk and it gives you pleasure, joy. You experience a certain joy. When you want to hold on to that joy, it destroys the joy, it brings in the effort of will to achieve something and turns that into pleasure. So thought does that. If thought does not interfere, thought comes from our conditioning, which makes us measure, makes us compare. You say, oh, the sunset yesterday was more beautiful than what it is today. And if you see a flowering plant, I wish it was there in my garden, and so on. So desire arises out of this kind of thinking about the joy which you have experienced. The joy is innate part, as I said, the beauty. In engaging in that activity, you experience it. So joy is experiencing, but pleasure is in demanding repetition of that experience or enhancement of that experience or greater excitement and greater enjoyment and so on. So it brings in all this measure and all that. And he is raising the question, can you just stay with the joy and move from joy to joy and don't convert that into pleasure by the interference of thought? Now you can't do that by deciding to do that, but if you watch this whole process and you see what thought does, it may cease because you have seen the mischief that thought plays, and you don't want to convert it into pleasure because pleasure inevitably accompanies pain. Because you are demanding now the repetition of that pleasure. If you are not able to get the repetition, you will feel frustration, which is a pain. So there is always, when you are attached to something, there is the fear of losing that attachment. And so the fear follows as a shadow of the attachment. So is it possible to relate to everything only at the level of the perception of the beauty for its own sake, which is part of life, and not demand anything of it? That demanding something brings in the ego. You are always wanting something more or something for yourself, and that converts it into a desire process. And desire is the root of the ego. I want this. So the I is coming in and getting strengthened in that process. So he distinguishes joy as something innate and pleasure as something that our mind creates through thinking about it, chewing over it. Then thought goes into the past, remembers a certain pleasure which you have had, and then says, I wish I could have it again. And it goes into the future and it says, I may not get this tomorrow or day after tomorrow. So can I possess this so that it's always there? And when you repeat the pleasure, it starts becoming mechanical and it loses its potency, which is what brings boredom. So what excited you in the beginning doesn't excite you anymore. You can see that in our propensity for tourism. You always want to go to a new site. The previous site, you remember, I have already seen it. Which means what? has it ceased to be beautiful? If you have seen the Eiffel Tower and you found it exciting and beautiful the first time, why does it cease to be beautiful the second time? Because you keep that in the memory. And the memory is a dead thing, whereas the perception, the joy, the beauty was a live thing. And so when you are watching something that is live through something of the past which is dead, that produces this comparison and demand for more or less and all that. So one has to understand this whole process of how desire originates. And one of the most beautiful ways of expressing this fact I found in a small poem by William Blake. He says, "One who binds to himself a joy does the winged life destroy. But one who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise." So the poet is comparing life to a bird in flight, and that is giving a joy. But if you want to catch hold of that bird and possess it, it will kill the bird. But if you just kiss the joy as it flies, you live in eternity's sunrise. So you experience the joy, it ends, you let it go, and you move on to the next joy. And that requires tremendous sensitivity, because there is, if you perceive beauty, there's so much beauty around you which you don't perceive because we are insensitive. Therefore, we want greater and greater excitement. And the same measure of pleasure doesn't excite you anymore. So it brings in boredom, which is insensitivity. Because what is boredom? After all, the tree is there, all nature is around you. There is your neighbor, there is the child, there is the grass, there are books, there is the radio. How come you are not interested in any of this? And why? Because you have already experienced it and you have slotted it into your memory. And now you feel you possess it and it loses its value. It's like whatever amount of wealth or property you have, it ceases to have value. You want more. And it's the more that is exciting. What you already have doesn't excite you anymore. So it's the same process of desire. And when you approach with desire, there are certain consequences of that desire. Either you will fulfill it, in which case you will feel momentarily a sense of achievement, satisfaction, which you will mistake for happiness. It's just pleasure, which you have experienced, of fulfillment. But the desire was energizing you, and that desire now disappears. And therefore the energy goes away, and so you feel stagnant and bored until a new desire is born. And then you are back into the circle. And if the desire is not fulfilled, then there is frustration, which is disorder in consciousness, painful, sorrow. So when you approach with desire, wanting, the pleasure is not desire. Pleasure is natural. But demanding the repetition of the pleasure and the maximization of the pleasure is the process of desire. So it's wrong to cut out pleasure, which is what some of the religions advocated, that since pleasure creates desire and desire brings complication into life, cut out pleasure. So the monks were told, don't look at a woman. And they avoid women because they are scared that they might get desire by looking at a woman. That's really cutting out life. That's not a religious life. So, can one be fully awake with all the senses, with sensitivity, which means the senses are responding intensely to everything? And the mind is also a sense. That is sensitivity. And that is destroyed because attention is directed towards the more. So sensitivity comes through contact. Sensitivity is not an intellectual process. It's like affection. I mean, you meet a child, you play with him, you develop affection. It develops within you. If you listen to music for a long time, especially classical music, the appreciation of that music or that beauty arises in you, in your consciousness, in your mind. So sensitivity comes through contact. And if you quickly measure and say, oh, this is boring, and therefore you walk away, you remain insensitive. You become insensitive. And then you want more exciting pleasures than the previous ones. And that leads to addiction. And addiction creates its own chemistry and its problems in life. So one has to understand this. What is the right relationship to pleasure? If we suppress pleasure, we cut out life. Pleasure is a natural thing. If we want to enhance pleasure, it produces desire and all the consequences of desire that I have just talked about, which brings disorder into consciousness. So is it possible to be like a true friend to everything, not wanting anything for oneself, but in the friendship there is the joy of sharing the friendship, and be content with that. So be a friend to the tree, to the river, to the child, to your work, to your wife, everything, without all the time demanding something for yourself. Because that demanding for oneself, whether it is psychological demand of seeking appreciation, or it's a physical pleasure that one is seeking, you are like a beggar. The ego is like a beggar, always wanting something for itself. The true beggar puts his hat in front of him and says, I need money, please give me money if you can. He is honest. He's telling you what he needs. We are not very different from that beggar, but we are dishonest because we carry a lot of bowls around us, invisible bowls around us. One of which says, give me sex, another says, give me consolation. Third one says, give me pleasure, give me appreciation. And anyone who puts something into your bowls, you say, good man, friend. And anyone who ignores you or takes away from your bowl, you feel is enemy. So it divides people into friends and enemies. All this complication, division arises from this psychological process. So to learn about all this is to pay attention in your daily life, how desire arises in you, what it does, without saying it is good, it is bad, it should be there, it should not be there, without creating any ideas, just wanting to learn about desire, the way it operates within oneself. Then you will see what is the right relationship with pleasure and also with desire. I mean, some desires are natural. The sexual desire is natural. When a man meets a woman, he may be drawn towards her. It's a biological happening. But where does the insistence on the fulfillment of that desire come from? Why can't you let go? You see that that woman is already married, that it is not possible. Why can't you let it go? Why do you have to pursue the fulfillment of that desire? Then in that process, it creates violence. And if it is blocked, there will be anger, which is violence at the level of consciousness. There will be hatred. You see this around you going on all the time. People want something, they desire something, that desire is denied, then it leads to violence. They are angry if the pleasure is denied. And in the extreme case, when there is addiction, they are willing to kill. The alcoholic only wants his bottle at the end of the day. Everything else that he does during the day is done with the aim of getting the bottle in the evening. It's not only addiction to alcohol that's a problem. All addiction is a problem. Because that means all the time your mind is occupied with that one thing and therefore excludes everything else. And you'll spend your life in a narrow lane. You're not connected with everything else. Your consciousness has only this one concern. And therefore, since you don't pay attention to anything else, you become insensitive to it. Because sensitivity comes through contact. You cannot teach sensitivity. There may be also insensitivity. There may be causes for insensitivity in the way we live. One may be not sleeping enough because one is too ambitious and working late into the night and so on. Or one may be having too much conflict and stress that also tires the body. Or one may be taking not enough exercise or eating the wrong kinds of food. All that would make the body lazy, and a lazy body is insensitive. So if you really want to come upon sensitivity, you have to attend to all this. Watch all this. And then if you come upon sensitivity, then whole of life is a joy. You can live with joy. You don't, and joy doesn't produce disappointment or frustration or any disorder in it. But if you compare, you say that joy was greater than this joy, I wish I could have that, then you have brought in desire, you have brought in that kind of thinking. So one has to watch also what kind of thinking creates like and dislike, brings in pleasure and pain. Once you understand this whole structure of pleasure and the pursuit of pleasure, it will cease to be inevitable. Normally, we see around us everybody chasing pleasure, and therefore it seems normal. It seems as if it's an inevitable part of life. And indeed, the belief comes that the more pleasures I can have, the higher the quality of my life. It's not true. It's not true. If you want a lot of pleasure, you need a lot of money to buy the pleasure. And we spend a lot of time working to earn a lot of money. But money only buys those things which money can buy. And they are all superficial things. You can't buy friendship. You can't buy peace. You can't buy happiness. You can't buy love with money. And yet money becomes extremely important in life because we don't examine it. What is the right place of money and the pleasures which money can buy? The greatest pleasures in life are those which cost nothing. The blooming of a flower, the setting of the sun, the joy of friendship, the smiles of children. If you are sensitive, everything is a source of joy. And one becomes insensitive because one is pursuing pleasure. And one pursues pleasure because one doesn't understand that pleasure, pursuit of pleasure, inevitably leads to pain. So if you want to live that way, you can. That's what Krishna says in this chapter. But be aware that the pain will follow. If you want to end the pain, you have to learn about it. You have to relate rightly with pleasure. So what is right relationship with pleasure in our life is the question that one must stay with and answer through perception in daily life. And the awareness that the way I approach it can create pain and sorrow and frustration and disorder. And if I approach it rightly, I don't create any disorder. That's the definition of right relationship. That there is no disorder coming in. It's all order. The moment there is disorder, it's very perceptible because it produces pain. And it's telling you somewhere you are approaching the thing wrongly. And that's the work that one has to do to find out what is wrong in the approach that one is making. And when you see the falseness of that approach, it will cease, which is why perception is the true action. Now, pleasure is physical, it's also emotional, it is also spiritual, and we think that certain pleasures are noble and certain other pleasures are ignoble. And that's just your conditioning from your culture. But if you understand pleasure without all those opinions about what is good pleasure, what is bad pleasure, what you should have, what you should not have, then you begin to understand your relationship with pleasure, independent of what your conditioning says. And you can discover your right relationship with pleasure. There are also emotional pleasures. There can be ego in that, in feeling pity, in doing charity, in working for reform, because you feel good, you get satisfaction in doing that. So ultimately you are doing it for your own satisfaction. Then it is a pleasure, which is not to say you should not have compassion or you should not do charity or you should not reform things. But can you do it without this desire for satisfaction, for name, fame, appreciation? Because when you do it with that, then the objective is some kind of psychological return which you are expecting. The return doesn't have to be material or physical. The return can be psychological. So you want name and fame and appreciation. You want to do better than your fellow man. All that also is part of desire, of ambition, of the ego. And it will have all the qualities, all the complications which come from that. Desiring the good opinion of people around you, something which we all promote and consider to be very good, but that's also a desire. And there is the fear of what they will think if I don't do this or if I don't do that. So the fear follows that kind of. The moment you have a reputation, the fear of losing your reputation follows as a shadow of it. So is it possible to be free of all this and to live with sensitivity and with the sense of beauty and joy without bringing in all these demands which turn it into a process of desire and bring in the ego? And if you experience boredom, it's an opportunity to learn. The boredom is telling me, Krishna, you have become insensitive. What is boredom? Why do you feel bored? When there are so many things around you, why are you not interested in all these things? Let me take an example. A man works very hard to earn money because he wants to buy a house by the seaside. And he works several years, collects the money, finally buys that house on the seaside and feels great sense of fulfillment. After a while, he's bored. He sees the sea waves, they don't excite him anymore. He says, oh, they keep coming, I've already seen it. So that's a great tragedy. The fact that ultimately we are bored with everything, which is why the whole entertainment industry makes money on us, because they know that we are bored individuals. And we accept that as almost a norm because yes, everybody worries, everybody feels boredom, and therefore it seems normal. So one has to also examine this whole question of what is normal. If nobody worried and only you worried, you would go to the doctor and say, doctor, something is wrong. I find other people don't worry, but I keep worrying. So it's in comparison that these questions arise. But Krishnamurti is saying, find out what is worry. Worry is thought tinged with fear. Why does worry arise in you? Why does boredom? Why do you experience boredom? Don't take it for granted just because everybody else feels it. Everybody else has a certain idea of success. Therefore, we also have the same idea of success. You have to examine it. Is that true? Is that intelligent? Is that healthy? What it does to you. Otherwise, it's like a belief that is irrational. So this comparison, the desire for more, and the desire to show off to others, all that brings you back into the realm of the ego concerns, self-concern. So thought, in a way, certain types of thinking is the culprit in this. And so one has also to see what is right kind of thinking? What is right kind of imagination? You need imagination to do surgery, to plan your travel. But imagination also builds illusion, creates desire. You imagine what it will be like to be in that house, in that car, in that place by the seaside. Actually, if you watch people around you, you will see that everyone is standing at a line. On this side of the line are all the pleasures and the knowledge and the relationships to which he has access. And beyond the line are things to which he does not have access. This is true of the poor man. It's true of the Queen of England. It's true of you and me. Every human being, you have a certain number of things you have already got. If you are healthy, you already have an infinity by way of good health. The day you lie in hospital for a month, you pray to God and say, God, I only want the strength to walk on that road. I don't need anything else. But when you are quite well, you've forgotten all that. And you don't value the walk down the road. So this business of, that's why they say, you know the value of something when you lose it. And that's true also in relationships. You get used to your wife, to your child, to your home, and it ceases to have the same value that it had initially when you began the relationship and you got the home and built it. So that's a great tragedy, isn't it? So Krishnaji is saying, can you approach everything afresh without the memory of the past, without comparing with that memory, and without demanding anything? That's living in the present, without bringing in the past. And that is freedom from the past, which is freedom from conditioning. The past is all conditioning. It is all stored. Past experiences are all stored in our memory. The factual experiences are fine. You have to know the road to your house and all that. But the psychological experiences of pain and pleasure, they create desire and they create fear. I had that pain, I hope I don't have it again in future. You are not having it now, but you are worried that you might get it again. So that's the nature of worry. And so all these complications come from process of thinking which produces desire and fear. So in the next chapter, when we meet after the break, we will discuss this whole question of fear. Also one of the very important things to understand fear. So I'll end it here and we can have some discussion. It's now, 10 minutes to 6. We started at 5, so we still have another 20-25 minutes where we can discuss, and at 6:15 we will break and meet again at 6:45 my time.
Sir, Salvador Rojas has a question for you, sir.
Yes, please.
Hi, Professor.
Hi, Salvador. Welcome.
Thank you. The question goes to understand joy, pleasure, when we talk about art. Those who create, those who have the creativity for a masterpiece, and those who are contemplating. If you go to a museum you see a picture there, you are watching at something that to some extent on your sensitivity creates to you some joy. But joy goes with those who contemplate something, and also for those who create something and then creates an art, so to speak. Am I right in the explanation that I'm giving?
Yes and no. It's more subtle because joy and pleasure appear very similar, but they are quite different. Pleasure is egoistic and joy is not egoistic. And therefore, there is an essential difference between the two. So if the artist has enjoyed his work and he wants to communicate to others that joy through his painting, then there is no ego in it. But if he is doing it to derive satisfaction of having produced a masterpiece, which will bring him name, fame, appreciation, and all that, then it turns egoistic. So that's why yesterday, I think it was yesterday or one of the previous talks, I said everything can be done egoistically and the same thing can be done non-egoistically. It's at the motive level that the ego comes in. So if he is doing it non-egoistically, it's a joy for him, and therefore he is doing it, and it's an expression of what he wants to convey to you, then it's not an egoistic activity. He loves to do that, and that's what he is doing. But if he is doing it to get good opinion of people and to get appreciation and so on, it becomes that subtly that it becomes a desire process and ego process. So you have to be very, very careful not to watch other people and attribute motives to their actions, but to watch your own motives. Whatever you are doing, the motive behind it is extremely important, more important than what you are doing or what not doing. And that is why Krishnamurti said, the approach to an activity, the approach to a question is more important than what you do or you don't do. Because the approach is one with motive or one without a personal motive. And applying it to our present, what we are doing right now. If I'm giving this talk in order to impress you people, get your good opinion so that you will then do something for me in return and so on, then it's ego activity. And if there is only out of friendship, out of sharing, because we are interested in this inquiry, then it is simply friendship, which is not egoistic. So every activity can be egoistic and the same activity can be non-egoistic. And I narrated the instance where somebody thought that Krishnaji had a nice thing going on in Brockwood and mentioned it to him, and how he watched himself for a whole week before saying it is not true. That's not the motive with which he is doing the work that he is doing. So if he needed to watch for a week, we need to watch for a whole year. Because our minds are so confused. Yeah. We need to watch and stay with the question for a long time and not reject the criticism. You can also be your own critic. It doesn't have to be somebody else who comes and criticizes. That would mean your mind is in a state of dialogue. You are having a dialogue with yourself that, Krishna, are you doing this egoistically or non-egoistically? And you have to be honest in answering that question.
Thank you, Krishna.
You're welcome.
Ruben, you have a question for Professor Krishna?
Welcome, Ruben. Are you still with the Mind Life Institute? or is this a different Ruben?
I guess I'm a different one.
Okay.
I am Ruben from Tepoztlan.
Aha, okay.
Hello, hi.
Welcome, yes.
Can you see me now? Okay.
Cannot see you, no.
Probably not. Your video is on?
Okay. Hi.
Yes.
Hi, yes, now I can see you.
Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I wanted to pick up a little bit on the last question before.
Yes, please.
It's about by seeing the conditioning, stop the conditioning. The conditioning stops. That idea, in my experience, is not quite like that, because I am able to see the conditioning, and I guess it's for many of us, I don't know. And the simple act of observing it, or the realization of the, let's say, the habit or the addiction, it doesn't, or the toxic relationship, it doesn't stop, you know, and that's what creates the more pain of all, that one is able to see it and one is not able to get out, let's say, you know.
Yeah, quite true. The thing is, it's connected to the question which Guru Prasad asked in the beginning of how deep the seeing is. It's very superficial when you are just naming the feeling. To just observe anger and say it is anger, that's just a recognition that you are experiencing anger. But there is a whole process behind that anger. Are you watching and seeing that whole process? And are you seeing the consequences of it in your life? So you have to stay with that question, and the seeing has to continue till you have a more holistic perception of the whole process behind it. If you're merely recognizing something, it just creates a question. You know that you are angry. It begins with that. But what is anger? And how does it start within me? And how does it build up? And what does it do to my life and my relationships? Watching all that would point out the danger of it. And when you see the danger of something, there is an intelligence which nature has put into us. It is not the intelligence of our thinking, which prevents you from courting danger. You don't court danger. You don't go near fire. Even the animal doesn't, right? It's an instinct. You won't court. So why are we tempted to do something which is dangerous? Because we are not aware of the danger. And Krishnaji is saying, you will become aware provided you stay with the question and deeply observe the whole process of it. It's not just superficial observation.
The whole picture, right?
Yes. I mean, I would give an example just to illustrate it. The example is rather superficial, but therefore easier to understand, but it is like a metaphor, a parallel. You see clouds moving in the sky, and it's quite beautiful. You see them, and you enjoy it. That in itself is not learning. If you see it and you have a question linked with it, why does the cloud move? And then you watch that when the breeze blows, then the clouds move. Now you've gone one step deeper. And then why does the breeze blow, right? So you have to have this, you have to stay with questions. And your perception will go deeper, as deep as the questions. Yeah, and then you learn out of it. But if you just recognize that there is anger, of course, anger has a very big process behind it, and it won't go away just by recognizing it, giving it a word. So that's another thing which Krishnaji pointed out, which is also important to understand, that words often make us think that we have understood something when we have not understood. We have simply given it a name, and it produces a feeling as if we have understood. Like, your teacher tells you that the stone is attracted by the earth because there is gravity. Now that's just a word, gravity. How does the earth attract the stone? It's not connected. It's not being pulled. It's not, how does the action occur? At a distance. So the word makes you feel that I have understood. There is gravity, therefore you are accepting that on the authority of Newton. But what is gravity? If you go deeper and ask, what is gravity? It's just a word. How does it act? Now that it went on, and then it was Einstein who took the further step of saying that, well, mass distorts the space around it. Now that's a very difficult concept, but at least it explained that how that force at a distance acts. So that's how you have to stay in our consciousness also. There is deep-rooted causation. And if that causation doesn't end, the effects won't disappear. So anger, jealousy, there is a deep-rooted causation behind it, which is related to the way we think, the way we live, the way we relate, and all this desire behind it, and shame and conditioning, everything is there in that, behind it. Ultimately, as we said yesterday, that our conditioning more or less dictates what decisions we take. And it contains a lot of false notions, and therefore brings a lot of disorder into consciousness and into our relationships. And eventually, therefore, also into society, because many such relationships are society. So if I am violent, there is a causation in the consciousness that creates violence. And therefore, there is also violence in society. So I'm blaming society for violence, but I'm not realizing that society is the way it is because I am the way I am. We are the way we are. And that's a deep connection. You may not perceive that. You may only intellectually agree with it. And that's not perception. So if you stay with that question and observe, eventually you have the deep insight, which is the perception. But the insight doesn't come quickly. I mean, you have to stay with that question and not be satisfied with simple explanations and words.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sir, Donna Fetter next.
Yes, please.
Many different people. Oops, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so sorry. So my question is similar to what we've been doing since what we've been talking about. But when it relates to people and so many different personalities and so many different facets of conditioning and the way we're fed different things, it interprets differently, to perceive fully without analyzing, is it right to just be clear that we're not trying to come to a conclusion?
You have to see the falseness of coming to a conclusion. See, in having been educated, we have been taught to live with conclusions and rational conclusions and the process of reasoning and all that. And in this field, the conclusion blocks inquiry. And the conclusion comes from a logic which is related to your conditioning. So the logic and the way the mind works, the values that it has, or the Christian mind is different from the Hindu mind and so on. So it's not a universal thing. it's become subjective. And so your conclusions come from a confused mind which has all the illusions of your particular culture and your own conditioning. So if it's not free from that conditioning, it will color the perceptions. That means one is confused. And a confused mind trying to make conclusions and take decisions, it's like Mr. Trump. He's trying to take decisions for the country, and he's one of the most confused human beings you can find. And we have elected him onto the top position. And they are realizing the mistake of doing that. So it becomes like that. But it may be rather obvious in his case, but we are all like that also. Yeah, we are confused and we don't know our confusion.
And I think also the division that, we imply that they are different from me, and to keep what you were talking about earlier, the desire, I see for myself the desire for my family to be happy. And there's no possible way that I can do that. It's impossible, because I would only be concluding what I think would make them happy. And clearly, we all have different ideas and different influences. So one thing I found is, just as we started this dialogue, in interacting with my family, because I have a lot of addiction in my family, drug addiction, alcohol addiction in family members, and just allowing myself to perceive it fully without trying to fix or solve or conclude.
You see, behind that unhappiness, there is a lot of ignorance. My own unhappiness also, and my friends' unhappiness also, my family's unhappiness also. And it won't go away unless that ignorance is eliminated. So if you just make the other person happy by providing something which he wants or he is crying for, you don't really help him. You are only giving him an aspirin. For momentarily, you are removing his pain. But there is a big causation why that pain came to him. And that causation has not been eliminated, so he will have that. He will suffer again, that thing. So it's not easy to help another individual. We all think that by doing charity and so on, we help an individual. We don't. You help a person, if you examine that deeply, you help a person only when you help him to understand himself and to stand on his own 2 feet. You don't help a person by providing a crutch, by consoling him and so on. It appears like that temporarily, which is not to say you should not console. Be aware of the fact that consolation does not solve the problem. So there is a deep problem which the other person is suffering from. The addiction and so on is coming because there is a deep problem in the way he is approaching life. And if he doesn't free himself of that, it's not going to go away. So you are treating only the symptom. You are not treating the disease underlying it. And if you hate him for that purpose or dislike him for that purpose, you make his problem worse, because he has now 2 problems. One is that he has this addiction, which he is not able to give up. And the other is that you now dislike him and hate him. And so you are adding to the problem of a sick person, which becomes our ignorance. So that's why compassion is necessary. You have to hold the hand of that person. But ultimately, it's only, in a way, you have to educate him, because he has not been educated into this. We have all also not been educated into this, because unfortunately, our education is very superficial. It just trains us in various methods and techniques to earn a living. But it doesn't give us a deep understanding of ourselves and our consciousness, which is what will help free. even if you don't become free, you at least become aware of the dangers. Now, if you are aware of the danger of addiction and therefore avoid addiction, it's a very big change in your life, right? But how do we get addicted? You are not aware of the danger. No? If you were aware of the danger, the moment you notice that you're feeling restless without this thing, whatever that thing may be, whether it's alcohol or coffee or your job, whatever, without it, you are feeling restless, which means that there is a psychological dependence developing there. And so if you notice it, as soon as it develops, it's easy to end it. But because you are not aware of the danger, you go along with it, and then it builds up, and then it becomes very difficult to end it, because it builds up, in the case of alcohol and so on, it builds up a whole chemistry inside your body. Smoking also. With other habits, it is mental habits that it builds up. So all those also become difficult to break afterwards. But it always begins, like all big forest fires begin as a small fire. And if you detect that fire, it's very easy to put it out. But if you don't detect it because you're not aware of the danger of it, it becomes a big forest fire, and the whole town and everything, they are not able to put it out, right? So it is like that. The habit, the addiction also builds up like that. That's why this question of what is right relationship with pleasure is something that should be part of our education. This question is extremely important. Every human being needs to know what is right relationship with pleasure. And you cannot just teach it. He has to really discover it for himself, the right relationship. But you can give him the questions at least. You can give him the questions, which is what we have done today. I have not made your understanding of pleasure, but I have given you a lot of questions to dwell on about pleasure, about joy, the difference between the two, and so on. But unless you watch that in your own life, you don't have your own understanding. You only have Krishnamurti's words or opinions and so on. That's not enough. That's too superficial. So that's why Krishnamurti says, don't accept what I say, investigate it.
Right.
Investigate it in your daily life. Yeah. That's the work really to be done.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank you. Shall we take a break?
Yes, sir. Half an hour, we'll come.
Half an hour, yeah. 6:45 my time, and that would be 3:45 your time. We
Yes,
meet
sir.
again after
Yes,
half
sir.
an hour.
We will do that. Yes. Thank you.
See you. You're welcome.
Krishna.
Break. Break. Half an hour.
Hey, Rohan.
Hi, Baldev.
Yeah, if you want to change the background, how do you do that?
Just like you have done it, I think.
I don't
Is
know.
it the virtual background?
Yeah.
You want to change it?
Yeah, I'm curious how you change. Is it a difficult process or easy?
I'm not sure what you're asking because in the virtual background you already have set.
Yeah, I know, but if
From
you
what I
want to
can see.
change the background again,
Okay. Yeah. If you go to Zoom preferences, there is a virtual background
there is
option there.
Zoom. There is that Zoom. Oh, you have to get out of it.
I can talk to you regarding that offline, Baldev, if you don't
Okay,
mind.
yeah, that's fine. Okay, yeah.
Yes.
I was just
Sure.
curious. Okay, thanks. Not
No
now.
worries. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks.
Are we ready to go, sir?
Yeah, I'm fine. I don't find my own face in the thing above. Are you able to see me?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
then we can go ahead. We can go ahead.
Okay.
I think more people have joined. We have 29 now. So shall we start with chapter 5?
So, sir, 2 more minutes because
Sure.
put the break a little later. 2 more minutes.
Sure.
Sir, if I may take this minute or so to just give a quick update on recordings, because I've received multiple inquiries regarding that. Just want to communicate with everyone that a good news is we have the sessions that happened so far as of yesterday. We have all the recordings and they have been uploaded on YouTube, but we are going to edit out certain portions such as last half an hour you saw that was just music playing in the background, things like that. After editing it out, we will publish those. So for that, we plan to create one channel so that it's one place where everyone can go and access all the material from there. We don't have to deal with sharing multiple links, you know, for each session. So I'm new to this process, and of course to video editing and everything. So it is taking more time than anticipated before, but yeah, you should have it in your email probably by next week. At least the initial, what the initial 4 sessions and a talk on world crisis that Professor Krishna gave earlier.
Thank you, Rohan.
Yeah. Thank you.
Should we start now?
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. So in chapter 5, Krishnaji deals with fear. And that's a major cause of disorder in consciousness. And one needs to understand how fear arises, what kind of approaches create fear, which may be unnecessary, and what fears are useful, necessary. So it talks of biological fear and psychological fear. It says the biological fear is something nature has put there for the protection of the body, like the fear of fire, the fear of heights, the fear of a moving car coming towards you, fear of accident. These are biological fears. The fear of the dark, the fear of large sounds. These are all instinctive fears. They are there in the animal also, and they are there within us. What we have in greater measure, which really creates more disturbance and is probably unnecessary to a large extent, are the psychological fears. Most animals don't have these psychological fears because they don't have ego and imagination and the kind of thinking which we are capable of doing. So in a way, this complication is there only for the human consciousness. Of course, we can't be sure of that because some of the higher animals do have a certain amount of thinking, but they are not able to put it in words and language. Therefore, we don't exactly know how their minds work, but it appears like that. Now, there are 3 major psychological fears of human consciousness, and they are all ultimately born of self-concern. One is the fear of future insecurity. You are not facing it now, but you can imagine what will happen in the future. And the way the human being tends to cope with this fear is to collect more and more wealth to provide for a possible imaginary future, not only for himself, but for his family, for his children, and then there is no end to it, eventually grandchildren, and so on, whoever he is identified with. So that's a big drive which born of that fear of future insecurity. The other is the fear of loneliness. That if I'm alone, I don't have friends or family, then who will look after me and what happens to, I will need companionship and so on. So in order to cope with that fear, human consciousness seeks permanent relationships, develops attachment, wants to be secure that these relationships will always remain there with me. And when there is attachment, there is always shadow of fear, because you may lose that attachment. Your wife may go away with somebody else or turn against you and things like that. So there is that underlying fear wherever there is attachment. Attachment is a kind of dependence as distinct from love, in which there is not dependence, or friendship in which there is not dependence, psychological dependence. The third is the fear of being nobody. If you are nobody, people will just walk over me and I won't be able to protect myself. As a response to that, human beings seek power, position, status, so that nobody dare to touch me or insult me or wrong me, because I can hit them back with that power or that status. Then there are smaller fears, which are also produce disorder in our consciousness and also restrict our freedom. One is the fear of public opinion, what other people will think about me. Because if they think highly of me, even if that is not true, so I project a certain image and I want to maintain that image in the minds of my friends and community or workers, colleagues, because then they behave better with me and treat me with respect and so on. So the desire to be respectable, to be liked, to have a good reputation, also is accompanied by the fear of being hurt, that reputation being hurt, somebody attacking it, bad-mouthing you, may affect that image which you are projecting. And sometimes if you are projecting too far out, you are not that way, then it also means you constantly have to live up to that image. So it becomes like you are all the time to be acting and living up to some sort of ideal or image which you are projecting about yourself. And so that becomes a conflict in one's life. There is then the fear of being judged. In the case of students, the fear of the examination. It's also a psychological fear, because you want to be valued highly. Actually speaking, the purpose of the examination is just to evaluate where your learning is. And you should be wanting to have an honest evaluation of your learning, because both you and your teacher need to know that in order to decide the future course of your studies and help and so on. It creates fear because one wants to do better than one's colleagues, and one is afraid of losing that status. I want to be first in my class. I want to beat all the others. The same in the office, in competition with colleagues. I want to get the promotion. I don't want the other person to get it. So the fear of it, the fear of failure. You apply for a job, you are being interviewed. You present the best part of you. You don't tell your weaknesses because you want that job and you are afraid if you don't get that job. So there is a certain amount of pretense which comes when there is that fear. Fear also destroys intelligence and initiative because you want to conform in order not to have fear, in order to have that respectability. And therefore, it compromises your freedom to be what you are. So one is all the time trying to be something different from what one actually is. And then there is the fear of being discovered that you are not what you are projecting yourself to be. And finally, there is the fear of death. Krishnaji used to say, is the fear of losing all that you know, your relationships, your family, your property, your knowledge, everything will go. So it's not the fear of the unknown so much as the fear of losing the known. And there is great attachment to the known because I know how to deal with the known. I have lived with it, I'm familiar with it, I know what to do with it. One is scared of facing the unknown. There is an uncertainty what will be on the other side of the known. There is a famous poem in Hindi, the language in India, which says that, I'll recite it in Hindi and then translate it for you. It says, इस पार प्रिय मधु है तुम हो, उस पार न जाने क्या होगा. My dear, on this shore, you are there is honey. I don't know what there would be on the other shore. So before leaving this shore, you want to make sure what would be the guarantee on the other shore. And if it is better, then you are willing to go there. So there is always this demand for certainty. And there is a certain fear of uncertainty, of facing, which is really an underconfidence in your own intelligence, of thinking out the thing and facing that uncertainty and living with it. So there are lots of these fears and they create disorder in consciousness. Imaginary fears cause worry. Worry is really thought tinged with fear. If there is no fear, there is only the thinking about planning, which is necessary. But when it is tinged with fear, you chew on it again and again and again. Repeatedly, the mind goes to it and wonders whether there could be a better solution, have I taken the right decision, and so on. So you keep on thinking about it when you have fear. That distracts you from paying attention to what is, to giving your full attention to your work. When there is ambition, which is very common, particularly in one's own profession and office, you want the promotion, you have ambition to achieve success, and so on. If somebody comes in the way of that, there is anger, there is enmity, there is violence. It may not express as physical violence, but inwardly there is fear, and therefore fear also leads to violence. Most wars start out of fear. A country imagines that the other country might attack us and therefore builds up a whole defense force and so on. So behind that there is suspicion, there is enmity. It is so also between individuals. If there is enmity, there is constant fear, there is distrust, there is suspicion, and therefore all kinds of imaginary fear. What that man may be doing, I don't know, and therefore certain amount of fear and uncertainty. The fear of enemies. So a lot of our worries and come from these imaginary fears, which animals don't have. Animals have real fear. They have real quarrels. If there is a bone which a dog wants to take and another dog is trying to take the same, he'll fight with that dog. But not over an idea. It doesn't fight over an idea of what is God or what is religion and so on. That is our specialty, that we fight for our belief and our ideas. And our ideas, we are attached to our ideas because we feel threatened by other ideas and other people's ideas. We feel threatened by another religion and so on. So Krishna says one has to look at these fears not piecemeal, not so much about each fear separately. It is not the object of the fear, because there are many, many, many fears. But what is fear itself? And why there is fear? Not fear of what? That's a separate concern. But fear itself needs to be understood. Because so long as one is living with all these fears, one is not happy. You cannot be happy when you are worried, constantly feeling it. There may be failure and so on, these imaginary fears. It means you are denied the silent mind. You don't have a silent mind. It is chattering, it is worrying. It is not living with the present. It is living in the future, thinking about the future most of the time. So it becomes a major distraction. And when you don't pay attention to what is, you don't have relationship with it. And therefore it affects your relationships and your sensitivity, because you are not in contact with what is. You don't see the beauty in it. You are in a hurry. You are relating only with what you consider is important. And that is important, which will cause fear if it is not attended to. But the other thing, not. In fact, education makes major use of fear to make students do the work that they want them to do. They are not aware how much damage that fear does. Because when you are afraid of somebody, what happens to your relationship? You won't speak your mind to that person. You will agree with him and you will not tell him what you really think. So you will say one thing at his face and another thing on his back, which means duplicity, which means hypocrisy, which means pretense. It destroys initiative because an intelligence because you are afraid of doing something which is not conforming, which is not approved, and therefore you are afraid of doing something new unless it is approved by the authorities. So Krishnaji raises the question, who is afraid? What is the self, and is it separate from the fear? Can it act on that fear and get rid of that fear? Is fear like a disease which comes into your body and you can take medicine and get rid of the disease and your body survives? Is it something like that? Is it something external? Or you are that fear in the sense that the fear is arising in you. The desire to escape that fear is also arising in you. And there is this contradiction. There is one part of your brain which is creating the fear. There is another part of your brain which is wanting to escape from it. So it is splitting yourself into two parts which are contradictory. And all that takes a toll on our health, both psychological health and physical health, and the health of our relationships. So it's one of the major factors. And one needs to stay with the fear and face it, not escape from it. Because when you escape from it, you will have to constantly escape from it, because the causation behind that fear has not been dealt with. And so the fear will remain. And temporarily, of course, you can cover it up by distracting your mind on something else, because it's your mind that is creating the fear. It's coming from your conditioning, from your thinking, certain types of thinking. For example, you have had a pain in the past, and the memory of that pain now scares you that you might get it again in the future. So you're constantly afraid that that pain may come back. And how to avoid that? It becomes a major occupation of the mind. So it's not dealing with only what you are facing now, but also what you imagine you might face in the future. That's what psychological fear is. So it causes a lot of suffering, but we take it more or less for granted. We are not able to distinguish between the biological fear and the psychological fears. Of course, the biological fear also turns into the psychological fear. They are not completely unconnected with each other. But the biological fear lies very deep because it's at the level of instinct, whereas psychological fears are created by a certain kind of thinking. And if you understand that, that thinking can be changed. If you don't think that way, that fear is no longer there. And of course, the greatest fear is because there is all this ego and desires of the ego. The ambition is an ego. The desires are an ego, is from the ego. And therefore, the ego is constantly afraid of the desire not being fulfilled, that my desire may not be fulfilled. What I want, I may not get, and so on. So the fear of frustration. You have faced frustration in the past, and now you might not get that promotion, you might not get that job, you may not get what you expect from the stock market, and so on. So wherever there is desire, there is fear of non-fulfillment of that desire. It's not that desire itself is a problem, but the attachment to its fulfillment creates a problem. It is that which is the ego. The desire can be an energizing thing. If there is not an attachment to it, there is not a psychological dependence on that fulfillment, you are not connecting your happiness with it. You're not saying I'm unhappy and I seek this in order to find happiness. So your happiness is not connected with it. Then that desire to achieve something is not, loses its power. It's not an egoistic desire. So all this is rather subtle and needs to be understood and explored. And it lies very deeply within us because these are psychological things. These are not just culture. So we talked about illusions. We said there is superstitions, which create fear also. But they are very superficial. They can go away with even scientific inquiry. Then there are cultural conditioning or illusions. And they create a lot of disorder too. But deeper than that are these psychological fears that I have just mentioned. You can find more examples of them because there are many, many such fears, some small, some major. And that's what makes you nervous. For example, a surgeon operating or a researcher doing his research work. There is this fear that what happens if my results don't come? I will not get my PhD degree. And so there is a certain nervousness, and that nervousness distracts you from paying attention to your work. A surgeon who is terribly concerned about the success of his surgery and has the fear of being unsuccessful becomes nervous. If he is nervous, his ability to do the surgery goes down. So fear decreases our capacity to face life as it is in front of you, to be in the present. It's an imaginary fear. You're not facing it now, but in imagination, it is now affecting the now, in the present. So these are self-created fears. And if we learn about them, then what Krishnaji says is, you can free yourself of all these psychological fears and approach life without a single psychological fear. Just adjust to live with the biological fears because those are useful and necessary and healthy. They don't create all this disorder and complication. They protect you. But all these other fears, they spoil the quality of your life, lower the quality of your life. So it's a major concern to end fear, which ultimately means to end the ego, because the ego is the source of fear. The self-concern is the source of fear. What is going to happen to me? What happens if I lose my job? And so on. It's always this self-concern which brings this kind of thinking, psychological fears. So it is the same as the problem is resolved only if we can solve the problem of the egotistic approach and free ourselves of the egotistic approach. Not approach life like a beggar all the time, wanting something for oneself, but approach it like a friend. So there is a saying, it's not Krishnamurti didn't say that, I think Khalil Gibran or somebody else like that, but it's quite profound. He said, life is not a problem to be solved. Life is a mystery to be lived. So it's an opportunity to understand oneself and to understand consciousness. And so one has to approach it with a sense of wonder, with a learning mind, not a fearful mind, a accumulative mind, a possessive mind, an attached mind. So one needs to free oneself of all this in order to approach life without fear. And that requires a lot of self-knowledge. It requires watching how fear develops, how this self-concern arises, what it does to your life, and discovering for yourself that you are endangering your own life and lowering the quality of your life by that kind of thinking. So when you see that it is something that is damaging you, it can drop away. But otherwise, you think that the fears protect me. And they block the perception of truth because one is also afraid of discovering the truth because the truth is the unknown. And when you perceive the truth, it may disturb. It may disturb what you have set up right now as your defenses in life, your attachments, your knowledge, and so on. So it creates a certain uncertainty, and that also means that one resists discovering the truth. One wants to maintain the existing condition because that's the known, and I know how to handle the known. But I don't want to enter into the unknown because I don't know. I have fear of that. So that's what destroys the new. It destroys the capacity for creative thinking and initiative. It's much deeper. So it would require approaching it with a deeply learning mind and staying with these questions and watching fear operating within one's consciousness. And it is the learning about it that can make the fears drop away. If you can reach the central point of fear, which Krishna says, you are the fear. Because you are the ego, you are the conditioning. And if you are not free from it, all the fears are coming out of that. So the idea that you can act on these fears and stop them is false, because you are yourself the creator of the fears. And so there's nothing you can do about these fears other than watch and learn about them. That learning may bring about a change, but your actions only complicate matters further, because the desire for enlightenment also becomes an ambition, a desire process, and sustains the ego. So the ego comes in many, many subtle forms. The desire to reform society, the desire to get moksha, all these are also desires. You may call them noble desires, but noble desires also have all those consequences because they sustain the ego process within you. So it's very subtle, and that is why this freedom from the ego is something which one has to take on very seriously. It cannot be attained or done casually. What one is used to is to have all your conditioning, to have all the comforts of the attachments and so on, and then get this understanding or this truth as an extra layer, add it to your existing conditioning. Your existing pleasures, you don't want to give them up, but you want another delight, the delight that Krishnamurti experienced. And that itself is to approach this ambitiously. It is still self-concern. So it comes in very subtle forms. There can be gross ego, like that of the thief and dacoit and so on, or the terrorist. And there can be very subtle ego of the highly sophisticated, educated man. But underneath all that facade, there is that same ego operating. Also in the religious man, the so-called religious man is seeking higher positions in the church, And that is also ambition. That's also the ego. So this whole concern about having noble desires and not ignoble desires is false. It's the desire itself which is a problem, not only what you desire. And all desire will be associated with fear. And at the root of it is thought, because psychological fears are created by a certain kind of thinking about the past and about the future. And so also in the previous chapter we saw that it is thought of a certain type which creates desire and creates addiction, creates boredom, and so on, all kinds of disorder. So one has to learn what is the right use of thought, what is right thinking, and what creates all this thinking which leads to division and disorder, which means measuring, comparing, feeling superior, inferior. All that is psychological. So the only way out is to learn about all this, which is part of self-knowledge. And we already talked about how self-knowledge must be acquired through direct perception in daily life by watching and learning. So one has to become a serious student of oneself, because nobody else can teach you this. So we are entirely responsible for our own life. Not to blame society, not to blame our teachers, not to blame our neighbor, but to learn that how one's own thinking is the culprit, that one is the author of one's own sorrows. So I'll end it here and perhaps we can have some discussion on this. It's a very deep subject.
Alina Carlos has a question for you, sir.
Please. Hello, Alina. Is she muted? I
Alina,
can't
I
hear.
think you're muted, yeah.
I believe she is currently not on the call. She might have dropped off.
Okay. So we take another one.
Guru Prasad. Guru Prasad, you're muted, sir.
I have unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. In the chapter that we were going through, there's a statement Krishnaji makes that I was very struck by, that once you understand your psychological fears, you will be able to really respond to biological fears a lot more, how should I say, without fear itself. That kind of struck me a lot because at the instinct level, as you said, the biological fears are there. And once you understand the psychological fears, even the biological fears tend to be less, how should I say, one being afraid or whatever it is. Can you speak to that to some?
Yes, yes, definitely. You see, all the instincts, they don't completely govern us. They have, in the animal, they completely govern the behavior of the animal. The dog barks because his instinct asks him to bark. He doesn't decide to bark. We decide to bark at somebody when we do. So there is this difference, and we have a certain amount of freedom. They have become tendencies. The instincts have become tendencies. The sexual instinct also, the instinct for self-preservation also. Now, certain types of thinking enhance the effect of the biological fears. So, if you develop suspicions, distrust through your thinking, the fears will increase, and the fear. So that's why I said at one point that biological fears also lead to psychological fears. So I think maybe that is what he is implying. For example, there is a certain amount of violence which is there in the animal. It's there also in us, the instinct part. But no animal has created the kind of violence that Hitler has created. Now, the thinking of Hitler added to that instinct and led him into that. And a man like Gandhi or Krishnamurti and so on decimated that, and might have had a certain amount of violence, but it didn't get exaggerated. So the thinking, once you solve the problem of learning about your right use of thought and imagination, the biological instincts may cease to be as dangerous as they otherwise might be. Because the two get added. The psychological part builds on the instinctive part. So many biologists and so on say, you see, dogs also fight. They have territorial feeling, and that territorial feeling is there in us also, and therefore nationalism is coming in us. Now, if you accept that explanation, then you cannot free yourself of nationalism. You say that it's an instinct, and therefore you take pride in nationalism, and you think that a man who fights at the border and kills the enemy is a great hero and all that. All that comes out of that. Now, it has built on this instinct of enmity for the other person. That enmity is there in the dog, but the dog doesn't add the psychological portion. He'll go and fight with the other dog if he enters his territory and so on. But in our case, we are not only interested in fighting with that individual, but we want to destroy his whole family, his people, his country, nation. So it leads to much bigger consequences in the case of human being. And therefore, it's important to, you may not be able to completely end the biological, but it will become much less fierce if you are free of the psychological. So the thought contributes a lot. It can add, it can also subtract, because through self-knowledge, which is not only thinking, but it can start with thinking, the questions come from thinking and inquiry, and through self-knowledge you can decimate it. And of course, in the religious literature, there is mention of people sublimating the sexual instinct as well. The sages and the rishis and so on. Don't have first-hand any information about it, whether that is so or it distorts them from within, but because they are controlling. But if we are not controlling and they can sublimate it or transmute it, they say that there is a lot of saving of energy which is needed for the spiritual quest. At least that's a kind of belief. I don't know whether that is true or it is not true, but you can take it as a question. So even I once asked Krishnaji, sir, aren't all these biological instincts inevitable? And he said, nothing is inevitable, sir. That means you can, through understanding it, you can free yourself even of the biological fears and so on. But that may be a step quite far. That was his experience. But the psychological fears, yes, they are our own creation, and they come from using wrong kind of thinking. Wrong not in a moral sense, but wrong in the sense that it leads to disorder in consciousness, which I just explained, how it creates a lower quality of life and destroys your happiness and so on. Even when you are quite secure and you are not facing any danger, but all these worries and fears, they make for unhappiness, the human being. That's why the wealthy man, the rich man, is not less fearful than the poor man. You can't get rid of fear through property and so on. Although one particular fear of the insecurity of the future is to some extent mitigated by having a lot of wealth. But then you have the fear of losing that wealth, or you make investments and those investments may go down and things like that. So there's constant worry about loss because you have psychologically invested in that in order to overcome that fear.
Okay, Olga. Hello, Krishna.
Hello, Carlos. You're looking good.
Yeah. You commented about this observation, self-observation, with an ingredient of inquiry in order to go deeper and develop deeper layers and have a process of learning about oneself.
Yes.
Now, Krishnamurti used to say that analysis is paralysis. So
yeah.
What would be the difference between this observation with an inquiring mind in order to learn about oneself and the analysis system or analysis process?
Yes. Analysis is just an intellectual process. It's like what you do in mathematics and physics and so on. You are arguing only intellectually. It is not emotional, it is not spiritual, and it doesn't use all your senses and so on. Whereas perception involves all your senses, is a holistic perception, a direct perception. And that is why intellectual analysis has the value of creating a question at a deeper level, but it cannot bring you to truth because truth is at the level of perception and not just an idea. Truth is not just a correct idea. So where it is just a field of knowledge and ideas, their analysis is useful and we use it in mathematics and others. So the rational thinking brings you to a conclusion which works. But in this field, a rational conclusion is not the truth. The truth has to be perceived as an insight. And that insight is a mysterious process which is connected with our awareness, which is a special quality of our consciousness. We have this quality of awareness, of watching what is going on and learning from it. The second bird of the two birds on the tree in that verse of the Upanishad. Yes. So that has to be activated. Yes, thank you.
Cecilia Martinez, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Professor Krishna.
Welcome.
Is there anyone other than thought, ego? Is there anything else really? If I am the thought, if I am fear, what entity observes that fear? Can you say it is intelligence?
Well, that's just a word, but the observer is the censor, the judge, the one who is judging, evaluating, measuring, saying it is good, it is bad, and all that it does from its conditioning. And if the mind is not free of its conditioning, it is constantly doing this. And that it becomes a subjective process. That itself is the source of fear. That subjective self-concern is the source of fear, like that. So actually, you cannot solve the problem of fear through analysis and through the conditioning. It has to be through perception. Perception is not from conditioning. Perception is from the awareness, capacity for awareness, which is not conditioned. So I talked probably in one of my previous talks about our consciousness having two components. One, that is the conditioning, the personality, which is subjective because it depends on where you were born and brought up and in what culture you grew up, and all those ideas, they build up the conditioning, including all the false notions of that culture or that family. And there is this capacity for awareness, which is a universal capacity. It is there in every human being. It is something that nature has given us. And the capacity for inquiry, that is also universal. It is there in everybody. We direct it. We inquire into what we want to inquire into. The businessman inquires into his business, how to improve his business. The engineer does it in his engineering. And the religious man does it in self-knowledge and so on. But inquiry is there in all of us. So these are the gifts of nature. In the course of evolution, our consciousness is probably the first consciousness that has this quality of self-awareness and the quality of inquiry. And we have not sufficiently utilized this gift. We have utilized thinking, which is born from conditioning. And that creates the fear, and that creates the division and the violence and all that. So it's a wrong instrument to use for this inquiry. It has only the value of communication. Thought has the value of communicating. It has also the value of creating the question in the mind. But it can't answer that question because it is limited by its conditioning. It is limited by the past. The conditioning contains the past. And the problem is always has to be approached afresh, anew. And that's not possible for the conditioned mind. So that's why freedom from conditioning is a prerequisite for this learning. It's not the end of this learning, it's at the beginning of this learning. Before that, learning doesn't even start because you only think from a particular point of view. You can't think holistically because all thinking is coming from your conditioning, and that is such a limited knowledge and limited experience of just an accident of birth. So it is not an instrument that can bring you to the truth. It has only the value of, as I said, of communication and of creating a question. But you have to find the answer through awareness and through watching. Those things are independent. The reactions are not independent. Your interpretation is not independent. It is done by thinking. So all those are doubtful. That's why Krishnaji lays emphasis on perception, which is in a way an insight, which is something you perceive. The truth is not the known. It is beyond the known. And therefore you need a creative insight to come upon the truth. And the mind that is chattering all the time, judging and justifying and arguing, is caught up in the known. Therefore, it cannot pick up something from the unknown. So it blocks the insight. That's why the educated mind finds it more difficult. I don't know whether you have thought about it, that all these people who we consider to be realized people were not highly educated human beings. Krishnamurti was not he never went through university and so on. He was not a highly educated human being. Ramana Maharshi was not an educated human being. Nisargadatta was not an educated human being. Kabir was not an educated human being. Jesus Christ was not an educated human being. So it is not a prerogative of the educated mind. In fact, the educated mind blocks itself because it lays too much emphasis on thinking and on argument and reason.
Baldev.
Yes. Hi, Professor Krishna.
Hi.
I have a question that the way fear appears, for example, in life, is that, let's say you lost a job and life hits you, and then you create a big thing that it's catastrophic, what will happen and all that. And we do understand that it's coming from our thinking, but sometimes the thinking is buried so much below somewhere that you don't know what is your favorite thought, which is creating this kind of catastrophic fear in you. So how do you, realize that what thought or which thought is creating this kind of big fear?
Yes. You see, thought has its own utility. You need thought for planning. You need to think in order to take decisions.
Yes.
Yes. But when it becomes obsessive, when you are continuously thinking and worrying about something, if you have taken your decision and planned, thinking has to end. So it's like if you can use thought like you use your screwdriver. When you have to tighten a screw, you take out the screwdriver, you tighten the screw, and then you put it back in the drawer. Then you are merely using it as a tool where it is necessary. But what happens is that this thinking is driving you. You are not the master. The thinking is the master. It is driving you. The thinking becomes psychological. It creates the fear, and the fear drives you. So then it is not being used as a tool. So that's why you have to come upon the silent mind. The silent mind can use thought as a tool. But the chattering mind is governed by its thinking. The conditioning is driving you. And that is one of the major problems why there is no psychological evolution. That our conditioning is there and it's driving all your thinking and your decisions. And your decisions and your thinking is determining your relationships, which determine what society is. If it produces disorder, it produces fear, it produces nationalism and so on, that is operating in society, in your life, and therefore in millions of lives like ours. And so it becomes part of society. So it's not separate. So the society is the way it is because of the way our conditioning is. It cannot change. That's why it has not evolved. You were with war 5,000 years ago, and you are still with war. Because a child is born, he sees nationalism going on around him, he sees casteism going on around him, he sees religious division happening in society, and he imbibes all that. He grows up with all that, and therefore, in turn, maintains all that. So what is outer becomes the inner, and the inner maintains the outer. And this goes on from generation to generation with minor changes. So how will psychological evolution ever come? How will society ever really change? It can change in superficial ways. You have better cars and better computers and faster aeroplanes and so on. Yes, but can you end war? Can you end divorce? Can you end the inability to cooperate with each other, work cooperatively? Can there be love and peace? No human society, no structure has been able to bring that about. They thought that communist revolution will change man. It has failed. The externals, changing the external environment does not change human beings. Without self-knowledge, there is no other way in which you can solve these larger problems, including all the ecological problems we are facing. We are not able to solve them because there is a deep-rooted conditioning of using nature to fulfill our desires, and there is no end to our desires. So you keep on destroying nature and using it as a resource, not realizing that you are yourself a part of nature, and that when you destroy nature, you are destroying yourself. You don't see that because you don't feel one with nature. So it's a very vicious circle in which we are trapped. And there is no, what Krishnamurti is prescribing is not easy. Agreed. But all the easy things have been tried. And truth is neither easy nor difficult. Truth is truth. If you don't live by the truth, you live by illusion, and you have all the consequences of that illusion. Yeah. So there is no shortcut and no simple answer. If there was, human beings would be intelligent enough, they would have found it and solved it. But whatever we have evolved has gone wrong. We discovered money, and you can see what money has done. It has created this capitalism and division between poor and rich. Sexuality, it's not a problem for the trees, it's not a problem for the animals, but it's such a big problem for man. Anything that we touch turns into a problem. And if you look into it, ultimately the source of the problem is from this ego process within ourselves, where we separate ourselves as individuals, and then our whole mind and intelligence and power is used to further the self-concern of the me and the mind. That is the nature of the ego. And that is at the root of the problem. That's what is not there in the animal or the plants. But our intelligence is our undoing. What we call intelligence is our undoing.
Angelica, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, Professor Krishna. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, my question is, which is the relation between the anxiety and the fear.
Insight and fear.
Yeah.
Fear is born of the known.
I believe she said, I believe she said anxiety.
Anxiety, yeah.
Anxiety. Oh,
Anxiety.
yeah. Anxiety and fear are the same.
Okay.
Anxiety is like worry, constantly worrying about something. It's there even when you are not actually facing the problem. There is anxiety. Anxiety is a worry. Worry is a thought tinged with fear. So the fear is what will happen to me in future. It's not a problem you are facing now. The problem you are facing now is an actual fear. The other is psychological fear because it's imaginary. It's not there. Not that you should not imagine, because you need imagination for planning. So you have to learn what is the right use of imagination and where imagination goes wrong. Because if you are therefore constantly creating fear out of imagination, then you live constantly in fear even when you are not actually facing any fear. And that's anxiety and worry. Say your child is ill. Now you have to go to the doctor, get the medicine to cure him. It's the medicine that will cure him. Your worrying about it doesn't cure him. Right? So it is the fear that makes me worry. The fear, what will happen if this medicine doesn't work? And what will happen if he falls ill more? Will my child survive this illness? And so on. The mind is constantly chewing on it out of concern, out of the attachment to the child. So the first part of thinking and planning of going to the doctor, getting the medicine and treating him, or choosing the right doctor, all that is the right use of thought. But afterwards, this thought is driving all this anxiety and worry, which spoils it makes you unhappy. So that kind of thinking, not useful.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Rohan.
Yes, I believe we have 6 more minutes, sir. So I'll make it quick. My question is about confidence, and intellectually, I understand that it's not confidence. At least it should not be coming from the memory or what I have done in the past based on that. And I believe in last few sessions you mentioned that a confident man is a dead person. So how do we understand confidence? Because it seems that it's necessary.
Well, when you are working with mathematics or with your computer, the fact that you have learned a certain technique and you know how to use it, and it helps you to solve new problems, gives you confidence that if there is another problem, I can most probably solve it because that past experience there. Now that kind of confidence is useful, but confidence in the sense that you have been coping with all the problems and living with them as norms, like worry and boredom, and you have found ways of escaping from all this and so on. That just maintains your life the way it is. And you are not aware that you are living a life of very low quality. Because the quality of your life is not determined just by your wealth. It's not just the quality of your physical being, the clothes you wear, the car you drive, the food you eat, and so on. That's at a very superficial level. But the quality of your mind, if you are a bored person, if you are a fearful person, if you are a worried person, the wealth will not solve this. So all that also affects the quality of life. The quality of life is high. When the quality of life is high in the physical, in the intellectual, in the emotional, and in the spiritual dimensions. That's our whole being. And when you concentrate only on the physical, it is a lopsided development, a lopsided concern. But because whole of society is doing that, in imitation of them, it becomes a norm for us to do that. And that's why you need to have this inquiry and a creative mind which doesn't think along the same rut as everybody else around you. Otherwise, to a large extent, we live in imitation of our surrounding. But it's only inquiry that enables you to stand apart and say, no, I don't want to go with the crowd.
So would you say then the holistic perhaps understanding might bring about a confidence in a being?
I think that if you have solved some problems through self-knowledge, then it might give you confidence that this thing works. Self-knowledge does really bring about change. If you can free yourself, let us say, which is not very difficult, let us say, of comparison. You see the falseness of comparing yourself with your neighbor, with your colleagues all the time and trying to be ahead of them and so on. You give up that. It doesn't. Then a lot of things you can free yourself of all feeling of jealousy, envy, inferiority, superiority, status, hierarchy, and so on. So a lot of friction and loss of energy which was going through all this ends. Now that's not too difficult to achieve. If you do that, it gives you the confidence that if I see the false as the false, it ends, and it does energize me. So if I can end one habit, if I can end one illusion, it gives me the confidence that I have the capacity to end all illusion. But that is a capacity of learning, this line of learning, which is self-knowledge, not the other learning. The other learning is techniques and memory and all that, building on memory.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so that's why Krishna says, test it, try it, find out if it is true. Because when you see the truth and it happens, then it will give you the confidence that, yes, I know how to solve this problem. But don't accept it quickly just because you see everybody else has the same problem. That is a curse which we have. That it seems normal when everybody is worrying, then worry seems normal. If everybody feels bored, I feel it is normal. If everybody gets angry, I feel it is normal. So I don't even create the question so long as I feel it is all normal. And you have to question your concept of the normal also. So Krishna says any kind of disorder in your consciousness, which is a negative emotion, which you experience, is an opportunity to learn about yourself. Examine it, question it, go into it, investigate it in your daily life through observation. Not saying don't analyze, don't think about it, but don't only analyze and think about it. It is not like a problem in computer science and so on, which can be solved by just thinking. So that was Nagarjuna's answer. It is not with thought, and it is also not without thought. So put thought in its right place. That's part of the learning. The self-knowledge includes putting thought, imagination, your body, everything in its right place. We don't know what that right place is, so that's why you have to discover that. It's like research. You don't know the result of your experiment.
Thank you. Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. So I think if time is up, shall we end it, or you want to? If there is some urgent question, I am willing.
I think we can end it, sir.
Yes, I know. 3 hours is a long time.
It was a long time. Thank you very much. We'll see you
Welcome.
next time.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Buen día, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Thank you, Prof. Krishna.